It sounds like an important person there, and it's just what you have to remember is I am just a guy from Wyoming, and that's where my roots are, and that's how I feel about things. I just had a lot of luck and circumstances along the way that brought me here. So I'm so happy to be here with you today. We'll start on the first slide. Before we do that, let me just give you a little synopsis about what we'll do today. I want to talk a little bit about myself and my background a little bit more, although I'm not sure there's much more to say because it's all there. We'll talk a little bit about our organization, and then really what I want to do is give you all some ideas about how I got to where I am, what has helped make me successful, and then be happy to answer any questions. If you can't hear me, raise your hand, let me know I can speak a little bit louder. That's usually not an issue, but I haven't given a lot of talks through a mask before, so we'll start with that. So we'll start here on the first page. You can see it says Iron Road Healthcare, formerly Union Pacific Railroad Employees Health Systems. So probably some of you have questions about why did we change our name, and does anybody see anything interesting about our former name? This is your first test.
The Union Pacific Railroad?
I'll keep looking. Anything else? Do you see how employees is spelled? It's spelled with one E. And so we used to have big print houses, all kinds of people, and we'd have people write in, email us, call us, and say, "You've spelled your name wrong. Did you know that?" And that actually goes back to the late 1800s when we became an organization. And there are two schools of thoughts about the word employees back then. One is that it was gender neutral. And in the railroad business in the late 1800s, there were a lot of women who worked for the railroad because they would be cooks or they would be take care of the hotels where the trainmen stayed. So it wasn't just a man's world even back then. There were women involved, and so one thought was that if you had one E in there, it meant it was gender neutral. The other one is that also back then, when they wrote contracts, they wrote them by hand. And if you go back and look in history, you'll see that a lot of handwritten contracts and notes and stuff will abbreviate just one E instead of two because it was more efficient. So there is your history lesson for today. How about that? So let me just talk about me a little bit. One of my favorite subjects, of course, is me. So as mentioned before, I was a healthcare provider. I was a paramedic in Ogden for the first 10 years of my career. Funnest job I ever had. Didn't pay very well. The hours were really crappy and stuff, but it was A, rewarding, and two, it was a really, really great job. And it also gave me a big perspective on the healthcare industry that has followed me through my entire career, even up to and including days like this, because we can relate circumstances back. And when our organization was facing a pandemic with our members around the country and our own employees, what were we going to do with them, how are we going to send them home, what were we going to do? Actually, I had expertise that we could pull from with our medical department in-house and talk about those things. So, as it says here, I helped develop managed care in the early days. When I started in this business, there really weren't PPOs, HMOs, those sorts of things, and they were just up and coming at that time. I worked with a partner on the paramedic truck who, to this day, we're in the same business really, to this day says that I had managed care in my blood from the days I was a paramedic, because we would often have people that were regulars, frequent flyers as we called them, that we would go pick up on a pretty regular basis who wanted to go to the hospital but didn't necessarily need an ambulance ride. And so the cost for an ambulance ride in Ogden, Utah, back in between 1976 and 86 was about $125. I figured out pretty quickly that we could put them on the city bus after we made sure they were okay, and send them to the hospital on the bus for 25 cents. So that was my first contribution to managed care before we even knew we were doing it. As you mentioned, I worked for the Sisters of Holy Cross. I worked for United Healthcare, for Health South, and really at Holy Cross here in Salt Lake and St. Benedict's up in Ogden. Holy Cross now is Ogden or Salt Lake Regional, and St. Benedict's is now Ogden Regional up there. But we really put together the first PPO network in the state of Utah, which eventually became First Health through a lot of mergers and acquisitions over time. but we put together the first PPO network, preferred provider organization in the state of Utah. And I've been the chief operating officer at Iron Road since 1998. So let's talk about our Iron Road a little bit. We built a healthcare system before anybody knew that we had a healthcare system. So our roots go back to 1870. We used to be part of the medical department of Union Pacific Railroad. And if you read history about the Transcontinental Railroad, you will know that they started building essentially in Omaha. They came west. They drove the Golden Spike on May 10th, 1869. Anybody know where? Here, yeah, Promontory, yeah. Okay, not Promontory Point because that's a point in the lake, but Promontory Summit is where they drove the spike. And that was in 1868. So 2 years later, we were part of the medical department. And again, as you read the Transcontinental Railroad, you know that they built hospitals and clinics and did stuff along the way where they were building the railroad. And what would happen is they would get to a place, say, let's say Laramie, Wyoming, and they would establish a hospital in Laramie, Wyoming, and then they would continue building to the west, somewhere between Laramie and Rawlins. And if one of the workers got injured or sick, they'd put them on the train, take them back to the closest clinic or hospital that the railroad built, and they would take care of them. And primarily these were Irish workers for Union Pacific, and the foreman for the Irish workers on every payday would go to them along with the nuns, typically who staffed these hospitals and clinics around the UP system. They'd go back and they would collect 10 cents out of their pay so that they could help pay proactively for their health care. So was born, unbeknownst to us, the first HMO in 1870. Okay. Now we move fast forward to 1945 and something called hospital associations. And if you're so inclined, you can go look that up because it's a very interesting subject, of course. But every Class I railroad in the United States, and there were about 32 of them then, in 1945, started something called hospital associations. And what happened was there was a labor movement in about 1943, 1942, where the labor guys were tired of the railroad dictating to them where they could get their health care, how they were going to do it. And so if I take the example of my hometown in Green River, Wyoming, we had 2 doctors when I was a kid. And primarily their practice was to take care of railroad workers because Green River was a big railroad town. And so I remember as a kid going in and we'd sit in the waiting room, and if a railroad worker came in, unless it was a life or death situation with somebody else in the waiting room, the railroad workers got taken care of first because they actually worked for the railroad. They were paid by the railroad to take care of the employees out there. And so it also meant on the other side that if one of the supervisors, the superintendent of the railroad, whatever it was, said, I really need John back to work to help move the trains and do that stuff, and John wasn't quite ready to go back to work because he didn't feel well enough or he still had an injury, the doc was really kind of heavy-handed to write an order to put John back to work. So on all Class I railroads back in about 1943, the labor people came together and said, we're going to strike if we don't get a little more oversight of our own health care that's out there. So anybody know what was going on in 1943, 1944, 1945? Correct, okay. And if they were to strike, if the railroads were to strike, that means the supply chain would stop for what they were doing for World War II for the troops. So Presidential Emergency Board was convened, and what happened from then is that every Class I railroad in the country was granted either a certain amount of money or a certain amount of assets or both to start hospital associations or give that to the union group so they could have their own health care that's out there. So that's really where our basis came from. As I said, we were the first successful HMO, and in our particular organization, we had clinics and pharmacies where the railroad ran. So traditionally, back then when we were doing all this, the railroad ran from Omaha, Nebraska, west to Salt Lake, north to Portland, and then south to Los Angeles. And so we would have clinics and pharmacies along the way. We'd have them in places like Omaha, Salt Lake, Ogden. Ogden had 2, as a matter of fact, because there were so many railroaders up in Ogden. One down in Las Vegas. I think that was for union people because they like to go to Las Vegas a lot, but we had one down there as well. And over time, we got rid of those clinics because it didn't make sense for us to have doctors, nurses, those sorts of people treating our members as managed care came along. So as we started to evolve into HMOs and PPOs, and they became more readily available, we started to close them. But we were the first in the country to have both clinics and pharmacies. Okay, another important, interesting piece of history here is that we were the first referral system as well. So we had something called district surgeons out there, and these were doctors who actually wrote checks on our behalf, and if you needed to be seen at a specialty hospital, so for instance, Green River didn't have a hospital, and if they couldn't take care of you in Rock Springs 15 miles away, they might send you to Ogden or Salt Lake to be seen, and that care was arranged for by a district surgeon. So we had the first referral system, we had the first clinics, and we had the first pharmacies that were staffed for employee use only. So if you think about what Kaiser did, and you go back and look at Kaiser's history, Kaiser Permanente, you'll see that they patterned themselves after us. At one point, we also had the largest mail order pharmacy west of the Mississippi River. We still have a mail order pharmacy. It's here in Salt Lake City. We send out about 500,000 scripts a year out of that mail order pharmacy for our members. But we are certainly not the biggest mail order pharmacy by any stretch of the imagination at this point. So let me tell you a little bit about who we are today. First of all, our tagline is Plan for Life, because of what our demographics look like out there with our members. So we have 13,000 active members currently. They're all employees of Union Pacific Railroad, and they all belong to some labor union that represents what the sort of work that they will do at the railroad. So they could be locomotive engineers, they could be brakemen, they could be signalmen, and there are some crafts for the railroad that are actually taught at SLIC for these members that are out there, for the employees that are out there. So we only take care of the employee. This also goes back to 1945 with an agreement because only the employee had health insurance then. It was in the early 1960s before dependents had any health care coverage at all. So I was born in 1958, and my father said that he bought and paid for me, and later, after I worked here for a few years, I figured out that that was exactly right. He did pay for me. And he said he brought me into this world and he could take me out. I'm not sure where that one came from, but I believed him. So that's cool. We also have at any given time about 2,000 early retirees. So under road retirement, where all these people get their retirement from, if you attain the age of 60 and you have 30 years of service, you can retire at that point with full benefits till you reach Medicare age. And we have a Medicare supplemental plan that we were one of the first in the United States with a direct contract with CMS. And there are only 5 plans like ours left in the United States currently. It's called an HCPP plan, Healthcare Prepayment Plan, where CMS or Medicare pays us directly for the services that we pay for these members that are out there. So when we say our plan is for Plan for Life, it really is, because we will have these people with us typically from the day they start work, and most of them are career people, until the day that they die. So my parents were exact examples of that. They had our coverage until the day that they died. So that's really a big deal. The other unique thing about us is that it is not unusual for us to have people on our health plan for 5 or 6 decades, sometimes more. And our PPO partner is Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and the first couple of times they were bringing reports to us, they were showing us age bands on what age bands were spending the most money on, diabetics and hypertension and so on and so forth. And they stopped, interestingly enough, at 75. And I said, well, where's the rest of this group? And they said, well, statistically, there are not that many people over 75. That should be good enough. And I said, no, we got people in their hundreds. And they said, well, I bet you don't. And we actually bet dinner on this one, which was good. I don't know if any of you know about Valters downtown, which is like the best place downtown, right? I won the bet because I knew it. They were amazed to see at that point that we had like 14 or 15 people over 100 years old still on our plan. So we keep these people for a long time. So what that means to us is we have 25, 30 years plus of very unique data on these members that are out there. And with that, we can start to do a lot of predictive modeling about what to expect. So the one thing that we know about most of our people out there, first of all, most of them are male. 95% of our population is male. The median age is 48 years of age. And we also know that each of these people has 2 or more comorbidities by and large. Okay, not every one of them, but probably 75% have 2 or more comorbidities. So we know that those are going to be expensive members for us as we go along. And it also gives us an opportunity to start looking at some programs that we can do and invest in, take care of these members out here to help reduce the cost of their spend out there. Now, most insurance companies don't care because their churn or their turnover is usually about every 3 or 4 years. And so they don't want to invest a lot of money in a sleep program. They don't want to invest a lot of money in colorectal testing, those sorts of things, because they know that population is probably going to move in 3 to 5 years, and they don't want to make a big investment. For us, the opposite is true because we own these people, again, from the day they start work until about the day that they die. We're an ERISA plan, which means that we fall under federal regulations as opposed to having to deal with each state regulator in the insurance commission. That is a godsend for us. I wouldn't be able to do business otherwise. We're also very agile and we can move quickly to assist our members. And we also have recognized over the year there's a real need to recreate ourselves on an ongoing basis. We can't just stand still. The industry's changing, the technology's changing, and the costs are only going up, both on the medical side plus the pharmaceutical side as well. So not surprising to anyone. So some innovations for us that we've done. And again, we can spend time doing this and developing these programs because we have these people for a long time. So I talk about drug manufacturer rebates up here. Many of you will watch the news at night or during the day, and the drug advertisements are just unbelievable. Some of these are costing us $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 or more a month per member that are taking some of these really expensive drugs. So for arthritis, for cancer, and the list goes down the line. But these, at the very end, they'll say, AstraZeneca can help if you can't afford to pay. So we started talking about that one day, and through my network of people that I have built over 30 plus years in this business, almost over 40 years at this point, it's like, why can't we, the health plan, take advantage of that? So I reached out to a colleague in the Midwest who reached out to one of his colleagues in Chicago, and we actually figured out that if we adjudicated the drug claim in 2 different ways, that we could take advantage for our member of whatever AstraZeneca was offering. And typically it meant that our person who may be getting a $30,000 a month drug would never pay more than $100 out of their pocket. And it also wouldn't bankrupt the health plan. So we were the first to do that in the country. It did not make the drug manufacturers all that happy when we did that, as you can imagine. But it's all very legal and all very straightforward, and it goes to the benefit of the member, not back to a for-profit health plan because we're not for profit. So we've been successful that way. We talked about the complete sleep program in my bio here a little bit. It was 14 years ago. I had one of our employees come to me, and they were paying medical claims on renting CPAP machines, and they said, and I'm a clinician by training. They said, the Sleep Congress is in Salt Lake. I'd like to go and see what that's about. And I said, what is a Sleep Congress? I have no idea what you're talking about. They said, well, it appears that we can maybe get our CPAP machines cheaper doing it that way instead of renting them, because if we rent them for 2 months, typically, or 2.5 months, we've already paid for it. And the rental contract with any DME, durable medical equipment company, is 3 years, 2 or 3 years. And it's like, why do we keep paying for it? So I said, okay, let's go look. So I actually went with our claims person down to the Salt Palace and to this Sleep Congress, and found it interesting, of course, because I have a medical background. And I sat in some of the some of the scientific talks that they were doing and thought, yeah, there's more to this than just CPAP machines. And we started looking at what a normal person with sleep apnea looks like. So they're overweight. They have crappy sleeping habits, eating habits, drinking habits. Most of them are smokers. It's all the things that we learn. And it's like, oh, that's what our population looks like, okay? Because our population is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They travel from point A to point B on trains, spend the night there. They don't eat very well. Their sleep is always interrupted. And so it's like, yeah, this is our group. So we started looking at what can we do for these members that are out here. And so we started not only just sending them the CPAP machine, which is pretty easy for them to use, pretty intuitive, but then we started looking at why are these guys having to go to a laboratory to get sleep tests? Didn't make sense. Number one, for the health plan, it's expensive. So it would cost us for a sleep test anywhere between $3,000 and $6,000. But more importantly, for our members out there, they had to take time off work in order to go get that sleep test done. Well, it's not, you can't call the sleep lab today and say, I'd like to come tonight for a sleep test. It doesn't work that way. It's like, okay, it's 3 weeks out. So these guys would do their, schedule their test for 3 weeks out. It would get to be a day or two before, and then they were called to go back to work, to go from here to Elko, whatever their train call was. And they had to make a decision. Do I lay off work, which is about $600 or $700 a trip, or do I reschedule the sleep test? So obviously they rescheduled the sleep test. So that was the early days of home sleep tests, and we started to look at those, and we thought this makes perfect sense for our membership out here. Let's start doing home sleep tests. Well, again, I was very popular with sleep doctors around the country about stealing patients out of their practice. And so I would get calls on a pretty regular basis saying, where did you go to medical school? How much education have you had after your postdoctorate doctor to talk about sleep and stuff? And I say, I'm not a doctor. I don't have any of those sorts of things, but this makes sense, okay? And true story, a group in Little Rock, Arkansas, of all places, a sleep group in Little Rock, Arkansas, actually called me on the phone and said, Mr. Potts, it would be advisable if you never set foot in the state of Arkansas again. So we knew we were onto something at that point because we were, cranking off all the sleep centers. About a year into it, Medicare came out and certified home sleep tests as a gold standard. The whole world changed, but we were pretty far ahead. And so what we did, and if you really are enjoying this subject, which I'm sure you are, you can go look me up and you can find the sleep article that was published, peer-reviewed sleep article that was published, and it will tell you about how we did it. But basically, we advertised to our members out there, if you're falling asleep at work, if you're falling asleep while you're driving at a stoplight, if your partner says that you snore a lot, if you're tired all the time, and we go through these symptoms and we send out information about you may have sleep apnea. And in our first year that we did it, we had about 1,200 people out of our population that we diagnosed, signed up and got them on CPAP. So what did that mean? Well, first for the member out there, being innovative, doing what we needed to do for them, it saved them time. It saved them money out of their own pocket because they didn't have to lay off work. For the plan, it saved us a whole ton of money because we weren't paying, $3,000 to $6,000 for a home sleep study. We're paying $150, and the person was able to do it at home. Good for them. For the employer, same sort of thing, is that the employee didn't have to lay off work, so they kept working for Union Pacific because they could have their test at their house when they got back home from their run. And for the labor unions, same kind of thing. We had these guys continue to work, and we didn't have to take them out of service in order for them to do these tests out there. So win-win for us. What we did find on our first study, we did a subsequent study which was not published, but they came out almost identical 4 years later, is that for everybody that we've identified to have sleep apnea, if we have them on a CPAP machine, it saves the plan $200 a member month. That is still true today. So it is pretty significant. And our total outlay with sleep tests, with the CPAP, everything like that's about $1,000. So do the math and you can see that just adds up pretty quickly. I'll stop for just a second. Any questions? Comments, nasty remarks, anything? I take them all.
I do have one question.
Sure.
So I apologize, I forgot the term, but you said that the health plan that you have, there's only 5 left in the country.
Yes.
Why is that? Why isn't that more popular?
Because they are, so it's our contract with Medicare that we have. And Medicare, first of all, stopped offering it when all the Advantage Care plans for Medicare Advantage plans came out. Most people switched to that because they could go across state borders and do all those sorts of things. So most of the employer groups just pulled out of a direct contract with CMS and just went to an Aetna United, one of those that offers Medicare supplemental plans. So there's only 5 of us left in the country that still have this direct contract and go through that. So.
Kevin, did you say it's only the employees is
Yeah.
covered? So then do their partners and dependents have to get a separate coverage? Do you have another, like you have a partner that offers
Yeah,
that?
good. That's a great question. So every Class 1 railroad dependent, spouse and dependent, is covered under something called the National Health and Welfare Plan, negotiated nationally for their 5 Class 1 railroads now. About 700,000 employees plus dependents, so we're probably looking about 2.5 to 3 million covered lives out there. That was developed in the late 60s and is administered primarily by United Healthcare. And so they take care of all the enrollment stuff, all the claims payment, those sorts of things. And then they also offer early retiree programs, those sorts of things as well. And not every employee at Union Pacific who is labor is on our plan, but 80% of them are on our plan. So yeah, great question, thanks. Any others?
I did have a question, Kevin.
Sure.
So with the trends towards employees and millennials and younger employees moving jobs more frequently, how do you see your business changing with employees sticking around for decades?
Yeah, great question. So also with innovation with railroads in the last few years is something called precision scheduled railroading. It started with the Canadian Pacific up in Canada, obviously, and has now come down to the United States. And so CSX, Burlington Northern, Union Pacific, and the other two have really gone to this precision scheduled railroading, which means that Union Pacific used to go out to whatever company it was, let's just say GE, and on a regular basis, they would, pick up carloads of refrigerators from GE and they would take them and deliver them. With precision scheduled railroading, GE may still be a customer, but what the railroads are requiring now is that GE have 15 cars ready on this day between this time and this time so that they can send a locomotive up there to pick it up or take a train that's being built and build it there, and then off they go. So what happened with a lot of industries that relied on rail transport to get their goods from their factories to the the stores, wherever the end result was, the railroads actually fired a bunch of their customers. I mean, as crazy as that sounds. But it also meant that they were able to decrease crew sizes. It meant that they were able to decrease the frequency of trains and increase the length of them. So I don't know if any of you ever go up like to Evanston up that way, but if you go up Weaver Canyon, if you'll notice the length of the trains now, most of them are at least 1.5 miles, some are 2 miles long almost at this point. And there are only 2 people, the engineer and the conductor are the only 2 people on that train. So just 3 years ago, that would have been 3 trains. So what's happened is we get a lot of the young guys come on, everything's done by seniority in a union. And so when precision railroading hit, all the young healthy people went away, young healthy guys in our case, went away. And we were stuck with all the people with all the comorbidities, which we still are out there. But most people who come work for the railroads are generational. That we know, number one. And number two, they're looking for the benefits and the security of the longevity of working for a railroad, because there aren't many industries like this where you can work from, the first day all the way through your career and then retire with really great benefits. So, yeah. But we're seeing a lot fewer healthy people in our health plan, which is not really great. So a new generation here. Former Governor Leavitt, former Secretary, HHS Secretary Leavitt, was in our office in 2009. About 1 week from today in 2009, because it was right after he left the Department of Health and Human Services. He knew about our sleep program, wanted to come talk to us. So he came out, and the Affordable Care Act was looming on the horizon right at that point, and we said, this is never going to happen and stuff. And Mike said, yeah, the train's already left the station, it's not coming back. And it wasn't just because he was at our place. He said the train left the station, but he was so right. And so that has caused us to look at a lot of things over the years, and it is not business as normal or as it used to be. It got a little more difficult, and we did have to, again, innovate and respond to Affordable Care Act things. There were things we didn't used to cover in our health plan because they didn't necessarily apply to us, so that we had to start covering all of a sudden. So as we talk about the new generation, one of the places that we've gone is to virtual care, especially this year and in our pandemic age here, doctor on demand. So if you look at our population out there, our guys use the emergency room 4 times higher than any other commercial payer in the country. That's true for every railroad person. And the reason is because they live in Salt Lake, they take the train to Elko, okay? Their turn point then is Elko. That's where they spend the night or whatever. They get to Elko at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? Where else are they going to go besides the emergency room? So we're introducing, and it's been kind of shoving it down their throats, to be honest with you at this point, the doctor on demand thing, because A, it's a lot less expensive. B, they can do it from their hotel room. It can be a virtual visit. They can get prescriptions filled. They can do almost anything, unless they need stitches, those sorts of things. But by and large, they can have a visit there. Once we get the guys to actually do, and I'm sorry I keep saying guys, but it mostly is, okay? Once we get them to use it once, it's like, then they're like preachers to the choir. It's like, this is just wonderful. How come, we didn't know about this stuff before. So that's one of the things we did. I'll talk about a couple more here as well. So we also think, what else can we innovate out there? So long-term care of our members is really important to us, and things that we can do to prevent their diabetes from getting worse. If we can prevent their hypertension from getting worse, those sorts of things, those are all things that we want to look at because, again, we own these people for a long time. So one of the things that we are working on and have for about the last 4 or 5 years, and this is all I spend my time on currently, is direct innovation to our members. So we did a colorectal campaign. You can imagine how a bunch of railroaders responded to that one. I go to a lot of union meetings too, and they would refer to me as the crappy guy, but with a different adjective that was in there. We proactively looked at our members who were over 50 years of age, who had never had a colonoscopy or hadn't had one in the last 4 years, and we proactively sent them a kit where they could, gather a sample of their stool and send in. It would tell them if we detected early colorectal cancer. So what happened here, we had some guys call up and say, don't you ever send anything like this to my house again. Stay out of my business. And then on the other side of it, we had one guy who called up and said, yeah, I went in. He said it showed blood in there. So I went in to see my internist. And while we were talking there, my internist said, this isn't coming from your colon, it's coming from somewhere else. And it turned out that this member had an aneurysm in his chest that was a slow leak, who could have died sitting in the doctor's office, who could have died in the emergency room, on the train, wherever it happened to be, but they were able to catch that. And having been a paramedic, when we had somebody with an aneurysm in their chest that burst, we could have had them sitting on top of the operating room and they would probably die anyway, okay? So this guy got really lucky. And there were several other cases like that where we found colorectal cancer early, got it treated for him, and moved on. So a win for the patient, obviously, a win for us, a win for everybody that's out there. We talked about emergency department utilization, shoving everybody over to doctor on demand as much as possible. And as I tell my staff, and they get tired of hearing it, if we take care of the member first, everything else follows. But in this case, if we can advocate for our members here, everybody wins in this circumstance. I firmly believe that. And again, most commercial insurers don't want to do this because they don't want to invest the time, money, and effort, because those members are going to be gone in 2 to 5 years typically. So change is inevitable. And again, we're pretty agile. We can move around pretty quickly and stuff. So currently we have 80 employees, most of whom live in Salt Lake, most of live in this valley. Just kind of interesting side note. We were able to literally in 2 days have all of our employees telecommuting because we had about 50% of our customer service people and almost 100% of our claims payers already working from home. And we made that decision probably close to 20 years ago. It was good for the employees. It was good for us. Productivity was higher when they were home. So we were able to send everybody home, except for our pharmacy staff who were filling prescriptions and stuff. And so they obviously had to stay. And then we had a building opener and 2 or 3 other people in accounting that would come in on a regular basis. But we were able to get everybody home pretty quickly, and we didn't miss a beat, which is great. The average tenure of our employees is 25. And again, our employees look like our members out there. They stay with us forever. They retire with us. They stay on our health plan, just like if they work for the railroad company themselves. Interesting statistic here, and I fall in this one, that 60% of our senior leaders can and will leave in the next 24 months. Okay, that's going to leave a big hole because now the average age of our new leaders is 30, and most of them have less than 10 years experience either in the industry and or with our company. So it's going to be a big hole. As I look at leaving and stuff, one of the things that our board of directors has asked if I can, for 2 years, just kind of hang on as a consultant, if necessary, to help them, because I now am the person with the most institutional knowledge at the organization, which I never thought would happen at all. So I thought I'd be dead first. Some people think I am. Additional thoughts here. If you don't innovate, someone else is going to do it for you. Our company, by all intents and all purposes, probably should have been out of business 20, 30 years ago, because we're not supplying clinics and we're not supplying pharmacies and we're not doing those sorts of things. And anybody can pay a healthcare claim. Anybody can help set up benefits, those sorts of things. But it also goes back to, if we take care of our members first, everything else will follow. And so we do have a good following of people, both employees and members that are out there. I'd encourage you to read and learn something about your industry every week, whatever that industry is. Because if you miss one of those weeks, if you miss one of those months, one of those years, you will be way behind the 8 ball on this. And so this is really something I really stress with our senior leaders and even our mid-level managers that we've got out here, is make sure that you're reading and learning something every week. And interestingly enough, sometimes they come to me and bring me information that I didn't know about and teach me things as well. So that's the whole idea, because I certainly am not the smartest person in the room. Next is surround yourself with great people who have different skill sets than you. Okay, these are all really common sense sorts of things, but it's really, really important that you have other people who challenge you, who make you think about what's going on, not only in your industry, but in your company, in your relationships. And is there some things that we should explore? There's some new things that we should be doing out there? And the answer probably is yes. But if you get too myopic with just the people around you or yourself, because you're not going out and asking people questions and having a good network out here, then you're more likely to fail than if you surround yourself with really great people. And finally, here's the most important piece of advice that I can give. I have relationships in this business that go back literally 40 years. These are relationships with people who are in our industry, who are kind of on the fringes of our industry, some who have never been in this industry at all, but people that I can call when we have a challenge or we think we've got a great idea. So again, the manufacturer rebate thing goes right back to that. The person in the Midwest lives in Indianapolis. I've known Larry and done business with him for 25 years. When I called him, he said, yeah, I've got this pharmacy group in Chicago. I think they can probably do this. And that's how that happened. I am protective about my network. I am active in my network, and my network is active with me as well. So we stay in touch. And the more you can know about the people in this network, the better off you are. So are they married? Do they have kids? What are their likes, dislikes? And then we try to make a point of all the really important people in this network. I try to get to see them in person every couple of years. Now, last year, that didn't happen, of course. And some of those are at industry meetings, those sorts of things where we can get together. But building a network and nurturing it, feeding it, and maintaining it are really important. If the only thing that you heard from me today is build a strong network and nurture it and keep it going, it will serve you well for all of your career. I guarantee it. Questions, comments? Because that's it. And here's, I'll be right with you. Here's how to find me. I told Whitney, if you guys come up with anything, in the future, you got any questions, would like some advice from an old guy, something like that, feel free to send me a note. I'll respond back, be happy to do that. I do some mentoring up at the U, as we've talked about, and I'm always happy to give you my advice for what it's worth. So, yes, sir.
With individuals our age, what would you say is the best way to start that network? What can we do to build that right now?
I would lean on people like me and others come to talk to you, and others that you can that are already in the industry that you might want to be in. So it might just be, let's say you wanted to be an accountant, for instance. Do you? Okay, good. I like you better already, so that's good. Just try to get with people who are working in the industry, regardless of what their level or stature is in an organization, and start talking to them and say, oh, well, this is really interesting. Would it be possible, do you think, to talk to your supervisor, somebody else in the company about how this works, and start building it just like that? So my network didn't start off with, like former HHS secretaries and lieutenant governors and stuff. It started off in Ogden, Utah, just by talking to somebody at the Red Cross about, as I was volunteering there, about, oh, this person, can we make these introductions and stuff? So I'm not sure that really answers your question, but start with people that are like in the industry. And I also keep a book of people that I do know and that I'd like to know. And you'll be surprised about, well, I'd really like to meet Val Oveson, who used to be the lieutenant governor of Utah and is now a consultant, primarily in healthcare. And it's like, I never set out to try to meet Val Oveson, but he gave me the best one of the greatest pieces of advice. And he said, read this book that says, Never Eat Alone. That's the name of the book, Never Eat Alone. And basically it tells you how to build your skills to have a good network out there as well. So that's a good piece of reading for you if you want to build a network. So just talk to people, be open to where the journey may lead you as well, because it may lead you off into other things. When I came to Utah in 1976, my goal was this: go to Weber State College, get an engineering degree, go back to Green River, Wyoming, and work in the underground mines. Now, before I left Green River, I was in a pilot program in high school where 3 seniors got to be EMTs. And so it was based on desire, based on grades, those sorts of things. So I took advantage of that. And once I got to Ogden, it was like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and be a paramedic and do that stuff. And why in the hell would I want to go back to Green River, Wyoming, where it's windy, and work in the underground mine? It's like, what is wrong with me? So here I am today, and I left Green River, Wyoming, never thinking that I would ever be able to stand in front of a class full of students, talk to, former HHS directors, those sorts of things. So it comes over time. It's building it, and just be open for the journey. seriously. And if there's, if you think that I know somebody that you may like to know, send me a note. If I can make an introduction, I'm always happy to do that. So it usually requires having to have breakfast or something with me first so that I know a little bit about who you are and what you'd like to do, but I'm happy to assist. So, any other questions? Yes.
So I noticed that you and your company are really big on innovation. How do you find to be able to embrace new things so easily, and how do you help encourage others to do so as well?
Great question. So some of it is pulling people along inside of our organization, because if you have worked for us doing one thing for 25 years, it's like, please don't make me get out of my comfort zone. But mostly it's through encouraging people and saying, we need to do these things. Why don't you be the innovator here? And you help design it. You help see what the goal is going to be at the end and what it's going to look like, those sorts of things. So mostly it's just having a lot of patience. It's encouraging people to kind of get out of their little cubicle, out of their square, and do some new and innovative things. And we've also, in some cases, we've said, look, we can pay you a little bit more money. We can have a little contest and do these sorts of things as well. So it's not always easy, but we can usually get there by just encouraging people to get out of their comfort zone a little bit. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask. I've learned that over the years too. So that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, no,
Okay,
that's
great.
great. I actually have a second question
Sure.
as well. So you said that starting out in Wyoming, you thought you were going to be working in the underground mines.
Yeah.
And now here you are,
Yeah.
putting yourself
Right.
as CEO, leader
Yeah.
of an insurance company,
Yeah.
basically, right?
Right. Exactly.
How did that journey of growth look for you? Like, did you always think that you were going to be a leader, or when did you find yourself?
That is a very interesting question. Did I ever think of myself as a leader? No. But as I look back, I mostly have been. So when I was a young paramedic, almost instantly I became an instructor trainer. And then I became the guy that would teach new EMTs in the classroom and in the practical side. As I volunteered for the American Red Cross up in Ogden on their disaster services side, it's like all of a sudden I was like a disaster leader sort of person. I didn't ask for those things, but it happened and evolved along the way. I think the same has been true in a lot of leadership positions I've been in an organization. I'll start off doing things, and I just start doing more. And I also think that really great people have recognized that I had some skills that they thought would be helpful and have helped me along the way. But none of that would have been possible without my network of people that are out there. So I can't overemphasize that enough. I've been very lucky throughout my career and throughout my personal life as well. But yeah, I never set out to, talk in front of a classroom of nice people like you. And I never set out to be a leader of the place where my parents were insured. I mean, that never crossed my mind, okay? And it never crossed my mind that I would be dealing with international union leaders across this great country either. So it just happened, it evolves, and don't be afraid to take the next step and the next chance. So.